Hello, we are Bob Chemical Group, and I'm Brendan Bizzelli, and this is our process designed for the production of propylene glycol. The process design for us starts with the sorbitol as well as water, caustic, and hydrogen gas. This will be then run through a trickle bed reactor, a liquid separator, 3 sodium ion exchangers that will be rotating, and then 11 distillation columns to purify our 3 products. Our products, or 4 products. Our products are propylene glycol, PG, ethylene glycol, EG, 1-fuel butane-diol, and hydrocarbons for fuel. So these 3 graphs, the PG, EG, and the 1-fuel butane-diol, the prices sold for the last 15 years. As you can see, the PG has been on the increase and will be nice to sell, as well as the EG. They've been slowly increasing the last 15 years. The 1-fuel butane-diol, on the other hand, has been pretty constant, which is still good, so that's more reliable, and you can easily predict the price of the price of the 1-fuel butane-diol. And then the overall process is right there, and it has the reactor, a cycle stream, as well as a separator, an ion exchange, and the 11 distillation columns. The reactor in the cycle is shown right here. We would first have to increase the pressure and temperature of the inlet streams to have them be at 2,000 psi for the reactor, and then the gases from the reactor will then be recycled and through a separator, and then recycled through a cycle stream, and that will allow us to reuse some of the hydrogen gas. Then the reactor will lead into an ion exchanger. This will allow us to, in this picture it is shown through a waste stream, but we would actually have to rotate the 3 ion exchanges we'll be having to get the sodium out, and by doing that we would regenerate it. And then through the bottom of the liquid stream we'll have our products as well as water from the reactor. The first 2 columns are shown right here, distillation columns. The first one, the purpose of it is to remove the water and monovalent alcohols from it. The second distillation column separates the EG, PG, and the 2,3 butane-diol out the top. The column 3 will then separate the EG and PG, our 2 major products, from each other to allow us to separate them and purify them. Just columns 4 and 8 will then separate the EG out the bottom at the purification of 99.5%. Which will allow us to sell these 2 streams. Columns 5, 6, and 7 then will then purify the PG of our system, our main product, and they'll also be coming out the bottom. And the tops will go into a waste. Distillation column 9 will then separate the lactic acid from the 1-fuel butane-diol, or 3rd product that we'll be purifying, and columns 10 and 11 each will purify the 1-fuel butane-diol. Column 10 will produce the 1,4 butane-diol as a product out of the top, and then in distillation column 11, the top picture, it will be produced out the bottom. And now Kirk will talk about the alternative designs we have.
Hi, my name is Kirk Santor, and I'm going to talk to you about some of the alternative designs that our team studied in order to improve the profitability of our process design. So we studied 4 main alternative methods for creating our products, and the first was a purification of a 1,4-butane-diol side product. Second was further purification of propylene glycol and ethylene glycol. Third was recycling a waste stream from the ethylene glycol back to the propylene glycol in order to increase yield. And then lastly was purification of another side product, 2,3-butane diol. And we actually found that 2 of these studies increased the profitability of our process design and thus are incorporated into our design. And you actually heard about those from Brendan earlier today. So these are just kind of outlining those studies and how they increased profitability. So overall we added 5 distillation columns to our design, which resulted in an additional $90.5 million a year in operating profit. So that's profit generated from revenue minus the operating costs, but it doesn't include the raw material costs because, as you'll hear Robert talk about later, that's one of the major determining factors for the feasibility of this design, and he'll go into that more in detail. And it really just was able to increase our profitability by over 30%, which was a really great addition to our project. The first design that we studied was the purification of the 1,4-butane diol side product. So previously this stream was being sent to waste and only being sold as hydrocarbons for fuel. But we saw the potential to purify this product based on the high selling price of 1,4-butane diol of 100 cents per pound. So in order to achieve the purification necessary to sell, it involved 3 distillation columns. The first column primarily separated lactic acid from the 1,4-butane diol. And then the 2 columns after that further purified each of those streams in order to achieve the 6,500 pounds of 1,4-butane diol product that we're selling. And 2 of those columns actually operate the reboilers at a temperature higher than can be achieved with high pressure steam. So those 2 columns will require a hot oil generation system. So that cost was taken into account, and this design was still highly profitable, and thus we decided to add it to our design. And it makes roughly $48 million a year in operating profit. So it is economically favorable and thus was added to our design. So the second design that our team studied was the additional purification of propylene glycol and ethylene glycol. So our team saw the potential because those waste streams that were previously being sent to be sold as hydrocarbons for fuel were rich in those 2 products. So we were able to add a distillation column onto each end of those streams, and the additional columns create 5,435 pounds per hour of ethylene glycol in addition to 3,823 pounds per hour of propylene glycol. And the operating profit from those 2 columns alone adds an additional $42 million a year in operating profit. So it's highly economically favorable, and thus we determined to add those to our final design. So the third alternative design that our team studied was recycling the waste stream from the last ethylene glycol distillation column up to the first propylene glycol distillation column. So this design built on our previous one. So we had a rich propylene glycol stream to send into our propylene glycol distillation towers in order to increase yield. So unfortunately this introduced a problem such that the 3 components in that stream were now ethylene glycol, 2,3-butane diol, and propylene glycol. And our propylene glycol product that we were trying to increase yield was actually located in the middle in terms of boiling point. So that introduced the problem of achieving the 99.5% purity that we need to sell. And unfortunately, after experimenting with different designs and optimizing the columns, we found that this design was actually not economically feasible. The amount of propylene glycol lost through the waste streams did not offset the operational costs involved and was actually less economically favorable than our previous design. So this alternative design was not added to our final design. The fourth design that our team studied was the purification of the 2,3-butane diol side product. So this involved combining the waste streams from the propylene glycol and ethylene glycol in order to increase the yield of the 2,3-butanediol product. And unfortunately, this design did not prove to be economically favorable. It required 3 distillation columns in order to achieve the purity for 2,3-butanediol necessary to be sold, and the yield was only 800 pounds per hour, and that revenue generated did not offset the operational costs, mainly because of the low selling price of the 2,3-butanediol being 26 pounds per hour. So this design was not added to our final report. So just to summarize, we added 2 of our alternative designs to our report, and those are not additional. Brendan talked about those earlier, but the alternative designs were in addition to our base case design. So next is going to be Alex talking about the process safety of our design.
Hey, my name is Alex Landon. I'm here to talk about the safety of our plant. To me and our group mates, safety is a very important aspect of our company. We talk about it in our company whole ethics agreement and everything around there. And we really strive to have a zero tolerance for injuries in our process. Our main goal is to send everyone who comes to work home. We don't want anyone to lose any limbs or get even cuts or bruises or anything like that. We just want to make sure everyone is safe, as well as to decrease the chance of chemical spills, explosions, and everything else which happens in chemical plants. So in order to enact this, we always stress to our employees to wear proper safety equipment, including safety glasses, nitrile gloves, hard hats, steel-toe shoes, and among other things, such as coveralls. Due to the presence of high flammable gases in our plant, we have there's no smoking policy for our plant to decrease the rate of any flammables that may come in and help and make an explosion. And also, all employees are trained yearly with these safety precautions to make sure that our company keeps it fresh in their mind and they keep on following them year in and out. And also, visitors who come in, they also will be trained too with these safety guidelines, so they will be safe too on their trips. So, in order for our plant to operate legally, we have to follow OSHA guidelines. And due to our chemical plant and what we make, we fall underneath the a Class D group in the Standard Industrial Classification for OSHA, and Industrial Group 2869, which produces industrial organic chemicals, because we have a lot of organics which we produce. Also, we have a hydrogen pipeline throughout our plant, which we use for a recycle stream, and for that we follow ASME B3112 guidelines for hydrogen piping and pipelines, because hydrogen is a very explosive gas and causes a lot of safety issues. So speaking of hydrogen, I'll talk to you about the dangers of hydrogen. Hydrogen is a very flammable gas with an auto ignition temperature of about 1,085 degrees Fahrenheit, and an upper flammability limit of 74% and a lower flammability limit of 4%. And in our pipeline stream, it is going at a temperature, fairly high temperature of around 300 degrees Fahrenheit. And also the pressure there is 2,000 psi, so we have pressure control valves throughout that process in order to regulate the pressure, making sure the pressure does not go out of control. Also, we have to make those plants or those pipelines would be grounded conductive piping in order to reduce the risk of sparking, so which would potentially set off an explosion. And the pipes will be purged too with nitrogen in order to reduce the sparking and remove the oxygen, which is very, very present in explosions. Another hazardous chemical we have is sodium hydroxide. Sodium hydroxide is a very corrosive metal, so everything that it goes through in our plant has to be stainless steel in order to keep everything working well and functioning properly. And also, sodium hydroxide is very hazardous health-wise, as you can see, it has a 3 hazardousness. And if it gets on your skin, it can cause burns and cause blindness to your eyes. So as a result, we recommend we force all of our employees to wear coveralls and gloves whenever handling it, as well as safety glasses. So make sure nothing is on their skin or anything else that may cause damage to them and hurt them. And also too, with the sodium hydroxide is very reactive with many other metals and other oxidizing agents, as well as reducing agents. The next thing we have is an ion exchange unit in our process, and I'll talk to safety about that because it's unique to our process. Iron, for the most part, is a relatively safe system compared to many other, like a reactor or things around there. The pressure, we have a pressure control valve for the inlet of it because it goes in at very high pressure. It's like around 2,000 psi. And also, the chemicals in it are sodium hydroxide, which I just mentioned is very hazardous, and sulfuric acid. So whenever we're interchanging those components in there, we have to make sure we're the proper safety equipment so no one gets hurt. Also, we have 3 ion exchange columns because the resin in the ion exchange needs to be regenerated every now and again. So we have 3 in order to keep the process running at steady state, so we don't need to stop the whole plant and then reboot the whole plant whenever the resin is changing. And also we have an extra one just in case that an issue occurs, so we can keep on moving it and everything works well. And the size of having one would be extremely big and not good. Also, we have a lot of piping in our plant, as most chemical plants do. And these pipes hold many explosive gases, so the lines of hydrogen, methanol, ethanol, and propanol. So in order to keep that safe, we have conducting piping for all of them, and they would also be inerted with hydrogen or nitrogen, and that will fall under the NFPA 56 standards for fire and explosive prevention during cleaning and purging of flammable gas piping, just to make sure that is done well and properly. And also, as previously mentioned, we have sodium hydroxide sulfuric acid, which would be very corrosive, so those pipelines would all be stainless steel, as well as the ion exchanger would be stainless steel due to corrosive elements in there. Here's Robert now, and he will talk about the economic evaluation.
Hello, I'm Robert McNulty, and I'm going to be talking about the economic evaluation for the project. That is to say, does it actually make money? Is it going to be worth from a financial perspective to actually pursue this project? Looking first at the inside battery limit cost, or IBL, this is the capital cost required to actually create the equipment we're going to be using. From the pie chart on the left, you can see that most of the cost is in the distillation columns. Just a little bit over half is in both construction of the columns, the reflux drums, condensers, reboilers, and pumps required to run them. The other components of the inside battery limit cost are quite a bit less by comparison. However, the one significant note is that the initial creation of the reactor catalyst will be quite expensive at around 18 million. If we break down that large capital cost of distillation columns into all the individual 11 columns in the process, we can see that it's roughly distributed equally across them all. Certainly the earlier columns, column 1, 2, 3, etc., have a higher cost because they have a higher flow rate going through them. So that's pretty much what we expect. There's nothing too surprising. There's no anomalies in terms of a column that's particularly expensive for some reason. And so the total inside battery limit capital cost comes to $87 million. Looking next at the outside battery limit cost, or OBL, this is the upgrades to the facility and plant that need to be done for the process to be implemented there. Of the 4 categories we're looking at, the main one is utilities. We need to upgrade the utilities, and that's got most of the cost there. But not insignificantly, there are aspects of plant site development as well as material storage costs. And so as you can see there, OBL capital costs come to $63 million for that respect. Moving on from capital costs, we then look at operating costs, and the primary chief area of that is raw materials. We're using 4 main raw materials, the first one being sorbitol, which is by far the most important. It is our main reactant in the reaction. It generates all the things we're looking for, and we're using by far the largest quantity of it. We're also using hydrogen gas, which is a reactant with the sorbitol. We're using caustic, or sodium hydroxide, as a catalyst for the reaction. We're also using a significant amount of water to act as a solvent for the reaction to occur in. All other chemicals, including sulfuric acid for ion exchange generation, are encompassed by a formula we were instructed to use. All of the prices for these chemicals are 5-year averages, with the one exception of sorbitol. The current 5-year average price for sorbitol is 33 cents per pound. However, the entire basis of the project is that there will be a price drop of sorbitol in the near future because of the removal of fuel subsidies for alternative processes. And therefore, we've assumed a 30% price drop. The expected price drop is between 10 to 30%, so we've assumed the high end to bring it down to 23.1 cents per pound. So with that exception, all the other ones are 5-year average prices for those raw materials. And even with the price drop, sorbitol still encompasses a large majority with just over 75% of the raw material cost for the plant. Beyond raw materials, we also have operating costs for the disposal of materials. The wastewater we generate quite a lot of water, and even though it is 99.5% pure in water with contaminants, that is still does require a cost being sent to the sewer, and so it's costing $12,000 per hour in order to treat that. And then we also have another smaller quantity of waste that is coming from the ion exchange unit that contains significant amounts of sulfuric acid and sodium hydroxide that needs to be disposed of as hazardous waste. And so it is incinerated at $64 per cubic foot for liquid waste. Beyond the materials, both disposal and purchasing of raw materials, we also have significant operating costs for utilities and operators. Most of these are comparatively small when looking at the cost per hour. By far the most significant is the high pressure steam, coming in at $7,000 per hour. The others are all well below $1,000 per hour, coming to a total there of $8,000 for the utilities and operators. And the final operating cost to run the plant, for every hour it needs to run, it costs $58,000 roughly per hour, and that amounts to $490 million per year if we're running for 8,400 hours per year. So that's what we have to spend to keep the plant running. In terms of what we're actually making by running the plant, we have our three primary products being propylene glycol, ethylene glycol, and 1,4-butane-diol. Propylene glycol is our main product. We're making by far the most of that, and it sells for a pretty good price at 82 cents per pound. And we have a yield in that of 34.14%. That is to say, of the sorbitol that comes in mass, 34% of that ultimately becomes our propylene glycol product. That may not seem particularly great, but the maximum yield for the actual reaction that occurs of propylene glycol is 40% if we were to collect all the propylene glycol we could. So 34 out of 40 is pretty good. It's not that bad really at all. Looking at ethylene glycol, it is a side product and it doesn't sell for a really great price. However, it's acceptable enough because we're making a significant quantity of it, so it's well worth purifying and selling. And then finally, 1,4-butane-diol. We're not making a huge amount of it, but it sells for a very nice price at 101 cents per pound. And so that's why we certainly pursued purifying that compound. All of our other waste streams can be sold for 60% of their fuel value. They do not sell for very much, but it's still worth doing and certainly better than trying to pay to dispose of it some other way. And so ultimately what our revenue from selling these products comes to is $45,000 per hour or $380 million per year. And you may notice that this quantity is quite significantly less than the operating cost for the plant. And so therefore this plant does not make money. It operates at a loss. Looking at the net present worth of what it would be, over the first 3 years you have the capital cost of constructing the plant, and then as it runs it's losing money, so you see that the net present worth with the 12% discount rate is going down quite severely. And so therefore, even with the 30% price drop of sorbitol, this plant is not worth pursuing. However, the plant would make money and would make around a 20% return on investment if sorbitol were to drop its price by 60% rather than the 30% we assumed. That price drop is pretty unlikely. There's certainly no trends that would seem to indicate that sorbitol is going to drop its price by more than half. However, if the legislative and economic trends may suggest that this plant could be worthwhile to pursue. However, based on current trends, the Bart Chemical Group recommends that we do not pursue this project because even with the price drop of 30% of sorbitol being the most influential operating cost, the plant still does not earn money, and therefore this process is not recommended to be pursued. Thank you for your time, and we look forward to hearing your feedback and recommendations. Thank you.